Have you ever been hurt by somebody and you really struggle with forgiveness? Maybe bitterness has taken over your life and you find it difficult to forgive this individual. Maybe they've asked for forgiveness and you can't forgive them. Or maybe they haven't asked for forgiveness and you hold on to the bitterness. Well, if you remember the time when Jesus spoke to Peter about forgiveness, Peter said, well, how often should I forgive my brother? And of course he said, should I forgive him 7 times? And Jesus said, look, Peter, you don't understand forgiveness. It's 70 times 7. In other words, 490 times. In other words, always, because Jesus forgives us as we turn to him. Well, I've been studying 2 Corinthians chapter 2, and I've been enjoying my studies in 2 Corinthians. Of course, God of all comfort, and we looked at that one time I shared with you. But here, Paul is writing to the church there at Corinth because a man that he had written about in the first letter to Corinth had sinned. He had serious sin in the church, and Jesus and Paul said, you need to discipline this man. And they do. And the man repents. But yet, it seems like within the hearts of the people, they can't forgive him. And Paul states 4 things that happen when we forgive another person. And I hope this will help you to see that forgiveness is really not only important for us, but for those around us. And I hope that you would not be chained to a bitter spirit. So this is what Paul says. He says, so I beg you to reaffirm your love for him. Reaffirm your love. He's repented. He's done wrong against the church. He's done wrong against many people. But now reaffirm your love. You know, Christians sometimes are the most critical people and could be very judgmental. And so here he says, look, you need to reaffirm your love. And then he goes on, for this is why I wrote, that I might test you and know whether you are obedient in everything. He wanted to see if they were obedient. See, the first thing he wanted them to understand about forgiveness is that forgiving others is a matter of obeying Christ. The Word of God tells us to forgive others even as God has forgiven us. As we have received his mercy, we need to share that mercy with others. People need to see the love of Christ in us, not just when everything is going well, but when we're hurt. Remember the example of Jesus on the cross. He said to those that had put him there, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So forgiveness is truly a matter of obeying Christ. When we don't forgive and we hold on to bitterness, we're actually disobeying Christ. We're disobeying a command of Christ. And the second thing he says here, and this is really an amazing thing, he says in verse 10, anyone whom you forgive, I also forgive. Indeed, what I have forgiven, if I have forgiven anything, has been for your sake in the presence of Christ. Now, there's 2 things here. First of all, he says, whom you forgive, I will also forgive. You know, forgiveness is contagious. So is bitterness. You know, when we become bitter against somebody, we share that with others, and they become bitter against that individual. But forgiveness can be contagious. Forgiveness is something that is able to affect the lives of others. If you're a parent and you hold on to bitterness, that bitterness can affect your own children so that they learn not to have a forgiving spirit. You see, when they see you forgive somebody that has hurt you, they're learning a lesson in life. Forgiveness is contagious. We caught the disease of forgiveness from Jesus Christ. It's not a disease, obviously, but a blessing. And that forgiveness that we receive from Jesus Christ should be contagious and affect others and those around us. And that's what Paul says here. Look, if you forgive him, it'll be very easy for me to forgive. And it's contagious. And then the next thing he says here is about the forgiveness being in the presence of Christ. We can enjoy the presence of God when we have a forgiving spirit, because that's when we're the most Christ-like. But if we retain bitterness, even if we can feel like we can justify that bitterness, we've been hurt, I can be angry, how can we experience the presence of Christ? Christ is the great forgiver. He has forgiven us. Of course, you remember that parable, the man who owed his master millions and millions of dollars, and he begs for forgiveness, and he's forgiven. And then he goes to a fellow servant who owes him maybe $8,000-$10,000. It's a significant amount, but nothing compared to the millions he owed the other. And he sends him into debtor prison. Is that what we're like? That's not Christ-like. How can we enjoy the presence of Christ if we don't act like him? And forgiveness is a great way to show the reality of Christ's forgiveness to all mankind. And so he says here, the presence of Christ. And then he says this, and this is so important, so that we would not, in verse 11, be outwitted by Satan, for we are not ignorant of his designs. One of the greatest footholds that Satan gets in the life of a person is through bitterness. And Paul says, look, we're going to thwart the plan of Satan by forgiving this man. And we're going to forgive him with our hearts. And that will thwart the plans of Satan, because bitterness creates division, bitterness creates hatred, bitterness creates all sorts of splits in a church, division among families, and that's how Satan works. And he says, look, we're going to forgive this man because we're going to thwart Satan. Look at forgiveness as being one way we can defeat the power of the devil. And so Paul here makes it very clear how important forgiveness is to this church. Forgiveness is important because it's an act of obedience. Forgiveness is important because it's contagious towards everybody around us. Forgiveness is important because it enables us to experience the presence of Christ in a greater way. And forgiveness is important because it thwarts the designs of Satan. And so I would hope, I don't know what you're going through, and I've been hurt by people, and you've been hurt by people, and we probably, be honest, we probably have hurt people. And the point is that forgiveness is always the way to go, because that is the way of Christ. And so may you and I forgive others as Christ has forgiven us. His mercies are new every morning, and may our attitude of forgiveness be new every morning. And so may God bless your life today and tomorrow and the next day.